Hi everyone, and welcome to Philanthropy Impact's Walk in My Shoes series for professional advisors. A series of discussions on topics that are relevant to you and your clients as they embark on their social and environmental impact journeys. My name is Sophia and I'm the Director of Membership and Development here at Philanthropy Impact and also your moderator for the session today. This is a strictly 30-minute session, but we are taking questions, so please use the chat function to introduce yourself and have your say and pose your questions. As always, we ask that you remain respectful to our panel and to each other. Today, we are looking at sustainable investment goals, and to chair this interesting discussion, we have invited our board member, Darshita Gillies, who is founder and CEO of Maanch, an impact platform. Joining Darshita today, we welcome Tony Schwarz, Millennial Philanthropist and impact investor, Paul Bryant, who's an equity and analyst and author of Sustainable Investing for Everyone, a private investor's guide. We also welcome Clare, who is the Executive Director for the Centre of Strategic Philanthropy at the University of Cambridge, and Jamie Webb, who's Director of Philanthropy at Synergos. I'll now hand over to Darshi to make a start. Thank you very much, Darshi.
Thank you, Sophia, and welcome everyone to this Monday espresso shots of wisdom on everything to do with philanthropy and impact. I'm really chuffed that I'm chairing this session because if I was speaking, I would have ended up taking more than an hour of our time. And we have some amazing insights across from global interactions with the four engaged members we have today on the panel. I'm going to start the session by asking Clare to start. And Clare, it would be wonderful if you could share with the audience a little bit more about how the Cambridge Institute looks at SDGs and ties it up with strategic philanthropy, and maybe draw on your insights from your past experiences as well as to how philanthropy and SDGs twine up together and what's possible if we bring wealth and philanthropy and impact together. Thank you.
Thanks, Darshi. That's a tough call, given this is kind of weird. I feel like we're like speed zooming as opposed to speed dating with 3 minutes, but I will do my best to be super succinct and to address that question. Just to confirm, our center inside the Judge Business School at Cambridge is focused purely on emerging markets because we feel that's where is the gap. Growth economies, we think that is the future of philanthropy given the expected intergenerational wealth transfer in those markets. And we are specifically looking at the Middle East, Africa and Southeast Asia because we think that's where there is least amount of information and data. I have to say I'm only a very recent convert to SDGs. I was a bit of an MDG skeptic back in the day, and when I found out that was it 8 MDGs had gone to 17 SDGs, I was very worried that we had further complicated something that was already very complicated, global development. However, and I should say my whole career has been focused on emerging markets and development. However, having worked more specifically advising foundations in the last few years, I realized that SDGs, perhaps more so than the MDGs, can actually be a bit of a leveler in the sense that they do now provide us with a very helpful framework on bringing some coherence to the international development community and to international development on where we invest and how we invest. So I do now cite SDGs a lot, and indeed our focus at the center, we've just finished our first report on COVID-19, and that has a lot of reference to the SDGs. But I think there are 3 specific areas we can look at where I find SDGs powerful, particularly pertinent at the moment, given what's going on with the global pandemic. And they are as follows, as I said, a bit of a great leveler. So if you look at the potential intergenerational wealth transfer coming from growth economies in the coming years, notwithstanding the GDP declines or stagnation that we might expect from the pandemic, you're still going to see a lot of capital, philanthropic capital, coming to market from these developing countries. And we think that historically, not enough voice was given to those philanthropists. So a lot of criticism of both the MDGs and the SDGs was they were cooked up in the global north and then presented to the global south. What we are hoping to do is to provide a platform for encouraging young up-and-coming philanthropists from the global south, particularly from these growth markets, to bring their ideas, to bring their innovation to the table and to the global philanthropic discourse. And I think that the SDGs are very helpful therein when you've got something that, notwithstanding its complexity, is pretty transparent and out there. I think that allows them to have input into that discussion. Secondly, no doubt it helps, I hope, with creating some standards around measurement. Every philanthropist that I have ever met throughout my career has bemoaned lack of standards for measurement, impact measurement. And we know that everybody's doing almost, too much of an overly concerted effort now to try and measure, to the extent that now we don't know what to measure. Should we measure? How much are we measuring? Do we actually use the data that we get from measuring? And I think there's a massive amount of confusion. So I think the SDGs can bring clarity to that space. I think slowly but surely they can evolve into standards for impact measurement. We already have the IRIS Plus that was invented by Jin, and other methodologies such as SROI. And I think that's hugely important, because if we want to, coming to my final point, bring more philanthropic capital into the SDG space, and we know there is appetite from global North philanthropists to invest. We know there is growth in impact investing. But if you want to accelerate that further, especially post the pandemic, we need to be able to show people where best invest. And I think if we can use the SDG to create measurement standards and also to identify gaps in the market, I think it's much easier for us to corral that capital. If we can say, hey guys, no one's doing number 8, can we please add some more capital to that? We can encourage philanthropists to be more strategic and more systematic in where they choose to invest, instead of perhaps where they might have historically gone, where their passion lies or where their instinct tells them. So I hope that the SDGs can finally also help us corral and increase the amount of impact investment money and broader philanthropic capital coming into this space, and investing more strategically where the gaps are, rather than duplicating. Thanks.
Thank you, Claire. That was excellent and on time. I really appreciate sharing such crisp wisdom. Appreciate it. Thank you. Jamie, I'm going to ask you the question to maybe share your experience from your lens of engaging with global families across different issues of interest. What do you see in your conversations with the families that you interact with? And it would be lovely to, even if you could spend a little bit more experiences around how families respond to you when you talk about SDGs. Do they know about it? Do you have to start the journey all the way from what the SDGs are and so on and so forth? Would be lovely to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Darshita. I'll be quite frank, SDGs aren't coming up very often in the conversations with the families in our networks. I imagine most of the families are aware of the SDGs, but would I say that they are framing their philanthropy, with a view to the different SDGs? I would probably say no. At least the people that we have in our network, which tend to be more experienced philanthropists, they've been working on, whatever cause they've been working on for many, many years. But I think it is a very good framework, and I agree with what Claire said. I think I've become a bit of a convert as well. I think if you take the time, it does require a bit of time to read through all of the different SDGs and all the targets and everything else. It does create that really good framework, which Claire said. But I think it may well be more valuable for newer philanthropists, or for people that perhaps they've exited their business and some money's come in, or they've inherited family wealth in some way, and are looking around, where do I want to go? And again, there isn't really a framework, because there are so many issues and problems in the world that need tackling, social, environmental, and it's like, where do you begin? And it is quite difficult. And I think they do provide a good framework. I think they provide a very good framework for advisors, because a lot of advisors that I've got to know, especially from the banking side, they've not worked in the charitable sector. They don't understand philanthropy in the same kind of way. But the SDGs are quite straightforward, and I think most people will understand what they're trying to get towards. So I think they do help for advisors having a conversation to at least start their clients down that road of thinking about which area to focus on. But I think what's also, I think, sometimes missed with the SDGs, that it was a misperception that I had, that actually it really only applies, with the exception of the environment, really only applies to developing countries, whereas actually they are meant to be universal. all the objectives within the SDGs as relevant for somebody living up in Blackpool or in Leeds or in Newcastle as they are in sort of the global south. So I think it is a good framework, both for thinking about where to focus on philanthropy. I think one of the challenges will always be, and especially if we're talking about philanthropists based in the UK or the US or in France or Germany, is that so much charitable giving is done locally. And so, you know, if you are a UK funder, you want to support in Africa and you're thinking about where to go, I think the SDGs is very, very useful. But I don't think they necessarily think about it from a domestic point of view. So it is a bit of a challenge. I think there is probably a communication challenge. I don't know whose challenge it is. Is it the United Nations? Is it national governments? Is it us, you know, in the broader ecosystem? Is it sort of, you know, the centres that are now developing that Claire mentioned earlier, in terms of that leadership role they have to share this around? Probably, but it does feel as though that there is a bit of a lack of leadership sort of channeling philanthropic money into the SDGs, because they were developed not just from government or the big international institutions, but for civil society, for philanthropy, for business, to bring all of their resources to bear on these different issues. And I think sometimes philanthropy is sort of overlooked, or philanthropists don't feel as though it's relevant for them. So I think there's probably more to do, especially as we're only sort of 9 years away from when they need to have been completed. But I think this year has been a very different year for obvious reasons, and the focus has been on the impact of the pandemic, especially the economic consequences of the pandemic. But if we do get through that next year, we can sort of pay attention back to the SDGs, because a lot of those indicators will have dropped this year, especially around poverty and healthcare and so on, and possibly even the environment. And so there'll be a lot to do from next year onwards.
Thank you, Jamie. Much appreciated. Tony, I'll move the digital mic to you. Please, could you share with us all your experience in philanthropy as well as in your impact investing, and how, and if at all, SDGs play a role in how you think and how you give and how you invest, and do you have a framework or a methodology or a system that others could navigate by? Thank you.
Yes, sure. So I have to be perfectly honest. I don't care about the SDGs too much. I can share a bit about how I approach the impact topic, which is on a high level to ask myself, what funds have I mobilized into impact investing and into philanthropy? And also, what funds have I mobilized in terms of family investing capital and also philanthropic capital? So those are kind of like my two main buckets. And then I have a third one, which is also, you know, bring other high net worth individual families or individuals to invest in certain investments, or also, you know, mobilize philanthropic giving on their side. So it's, on a high level, it's the funds that I mobilize into philanthropy and investments. And to get a bit more specific also on the impact measurements on the investments, there is a very great resource from the Impact Management Project. I'll just briefly post the link here, which I think is a great start if you want to get smart on how to approach this topic on a portfolio level. So basically you can categorize it by 4 main categories, which is, you know, you can have investments that actually produce harm. There are investments that are kind of neutral or act to avoid harm. Then you have benefit stakeholders, and then the last bucket is the most interesting, which is contribute to solutions, where you have a measurable impact with metrics and reporting, etc. And so I always think it's a bit difficult, this whole impact topic, especially when we're talking about investments into funds where just like a very small piece of a larger puzzle. So I'm personally more interested about catalytic impact, So creating new projects which haven't been there, be it philanthropy or investing, you know, helping to seed new funds, helping to fund a new NGO or you know, start a new advocacy project. And I think what I also wanted to highlight here in my talk is this concept of intersectionality, which I think the concept of intersectionality is not very well known in the investing world, which is basically that you cannot separate you know, the various topics from each other. So the whole climate challenge is very much intertwined with the democratic challenge, which is intertwined with the racial problems that we have. So you know, it's much more complicated than just saying, there are like these 70s SDGs, different SDGs which we have to solve. So I'm not a huge fan of that. And yeah, and maybe in terms of a very nice catalytic philanthropy engagement, I just wanted to highlight that there is an organization called MC Social Capital, where you can actually provide philanthropic funds that have a catalytic impact on an investment level through a very innovative guarantor scheme. So happy to also have people reach out to me about this. Yeah, I don't know if there are any other things that I should talk about, but it's obviously a question that is extremely complicated. And in the end, I believe the true impact is where you have a neglected topic with a high impact potential, which kind of fits your budget. So I think this is kind of the sweet spot where you can have a real impact.
Thank you, Tony. That's very helpful to know, and also to see how you intuitively navigate around impact topics rather than through a framework. And I personally believe that all actions have an impact on SDGs. So whether we tag them or not, at the fact that we keep doing what's needing to be done, we'll get there in the future. Paul, moving to you, and I would love for you to share highlights or snippets from the book you wrote on sustainable investing. But also, are there any other examples from your experience that might be of value for this audience? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Darshi. So the book, my day job, I provide investment research on financial services companies to investors. And some of those companies are asset managers who run sustainable funds or specialize entirely in sustainable investing. Speaking to some of the investors, reading my research, fielding questions from them, it struck me how basic some of the knowledge was of sustainable investing, even amongst what you would call fairly sophisticated investors, and also how confused they were with all of the jargon being bandied around. You know, we talk about sustainable investing, responsible ESG, and you have some of the professionals getting into arguments about definitions of what these different buckets of investing are. So it was really just a project I took on to, I like to use the word translate some of the corporate jargon in the sustainable investing space to everyday investors who are interested in their own portfolios, funds, pension funds, that sort of thing. So I really got into the nitty-gritty of how an individual's investment can make a difference, influence corporate behavior, channel capital into sustainable investing projects. I spent quite a bit of time on the economic argument that sustainable investing sits right up on the scale of the highest returns compared to all sorts of funds, and then really got into exactly how to do it. So if you pick your own stocks, if you invest in funds, all of those different variants, if you use an advisor, if you use a do-it-yourself investment platform, exactly how to go about it, how to analyze your own portfolio, take a very basic approach, take your top 2 or 3 holdings, have a look what tools are available to you to assess the sustainability credentials of those investments. So that's the quick and dirty story.
Thank you, Paul. And have you encountered any or insights on how investors can navigate and through an
Yeah, you were breaking up a bit there, Darshi. I think I got the question. One of the key messages is there are a lot of tools available to make this a fairly easy process. Even to the advisors, there's stuff available to assess the credentials of investment funds, individual companies, if you're doing that. Some of the large data providers, I mean, the biggest ones, companies like Morningstar, MSCI, they have some really good, even free tools available. And I think some of the key messages which came out in my research was don't take too much at face value. There is a lot of labeling going on of sustainable funds, ESG funds, that kind of thing. It really is worth digging into what's underneath each investment. And best practice out there is very, very good. You know, the good funds do link the impact of the capital they manage to the SDGs. Some of them have proprietary measurement systems, but the really best funds out there, it's fairly straightforward to see how that capital is being channeled and you know, the impact that that capital is having. So I would say be demanding on the managers of your investments and how it's having an impact. Don't just believe a score or a label.
Thank you, Paul. We have a few questions coming in. There's one for you, Claire, where the question is, do you think organizations are tracking their impact against SDGs in ways that could help with your compelling vision of supporting strategic philanthropy to avoid duplication and identification of gaps in market?
Yeah, thanks, Darshi. I maybe jumped the gun there and gave a quick written answer, which I'm happy to repeat. But yeah, so the research. So I mean, I should say, you know, listening to Antonis, it's true that up until very recently, very few people in the philanthropic sector would ever mention SDGs. I remember we were involved in the establishment of the OECD's Net Forward Network for Foundations back in, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 years ago even. And one of the first questions that they said when they united all these philanthropists around the table, philanthropists interested in development, that how many of you care about SDGs? And pretty much everybody said, mm-mm. So it is still very early days. And the philanthropic sector, I think, has been notorious for not paying attention to the SDGs, but that is changing. I think the OECD's network has been part of that, an effort to bring philanthropists into the development discourse, which we should remember also was not the case a while back. Before we, you know, this kind of systematic growth in philanthropic capital, development was always seen as an aid issue and not something that philanthropy could necessarily contribute to. Now that that's changing, now that you're seeing marrying of philanthropic capital with ODA, I mean, it's still only a small percentage of it, but that is likely to grow. I think the appetite for philanthropists to speak SDG will grow. And in the COVID-19 research that we've just completed, we found an Indonesian foundation, for example, that was saying absolutely their education initiatives were all fully aligned with it. They used an SDG to align their portfolio. In Egypt, also looking at SDG 8 around job creation. So it is starting to happen. It's very slow, a slow process. I would say it's still very nascent. Probably the vast majority of foundations still don't systematically use SDGs or use it as an integral part of their measurement. It is a kind of a guiding star, if you like, and I think it's bringing people closer together and able to have a better conversation where you measure oranges with oranges and a less disparate discussion about international development.
Thank you, Claire. And a general question for the panel, and I think we do have time if we keep our answers short for everyone to answer this one question, which is in your, from your perspective, what role can professional advisors play in supporting their clients' journey towards impact?
Yeah, I could take that if you want. Yeah, a huge role. As I mentioned, many private investors, they want to get involved in impact investing, social investing. Many are confused and don't know how. Some are worried that it would cost them investment returns. So I think for an advisor, who is closer to that space, can again play a role translating some of the jargon, putting their minds at rest in terms of what are the options available and the impact that their money can have, and even small amounts of investment can have impact. I think that's a key role.
Thank you, Paul.
I also have a short comment, which is there's a great program between Zurich University and Harvard University teaching next gens about impact investing and also impactful philanthropy. So yeah, so if you have clients that really want to get like a crash course on impact investing and philanthropy, I think it's a great place to start.
The what I notice with the families in our network is that they tend to, there's a lot of impact investing going on, but perhaps not as we think it is. It's sort of investing in sort of social businesses. So just one recent example is the London Interdisciplinary School, which some of you might have heard about, which is a new university accepting applications from next September. It'll be the first university really on the planet which will just teach in an interdisciplinary rather than the sort of the traditional singular discipline way. And that's been, there's been UK government funding behind it, but also there's been a lot of, philanthropic impact investment money in there as well. And there is a return because obviously it's a university accredited, and there'll be income from fees as well as from management courses that they will provide for the private sector. So there's some really interesting ways to do impact investing without necessarily putting it into funding, and that's what I'm noticing more from the families in my network.
Claire, did you want to add before I take over? No?
Actually, no, I was waiting to segue into your potential questions.
Okay. All right. Well, great. 30 minutes goes really fast and we barely scratch the surface. I really think that we should put on a proper webinar on this topic. And I think it would be good to get some debate going because there seem to be a few slightly different perspectives. So it'd be good to explore those further. So Jamie, Paul, Darcy, Tony, and Claire, thank you very much. One final question to each one of you is, if you could give final words of wisdom to the audience, keeping in mind the audience is just not here today, but also we'll be looking at it offline. So what would be final words of wisdom, and maybe tie it to what kind of society we want to build? So Paul, over to you.
Yeah, I think I would encourage people, particularly on the commercial end of this investing spectrum, think about sustainable investing as channeling funds into the industries and businesses of the future. So there's an economic argument to this as well. And also influences businesses who may be a little engaged in practices we are not all that keen on. We can influence them. So it has a huge role in that societal link, which you've just drawn there.
Thank you. Jamie.
What I see is philanthropists who are established actually moving more of their capital portfolios, wealth, into either impact investing, or they're applying a social lens, a social return lens, rather than it just being very, their philanthropy goes here and then the rest of their wealth sits over here, and there's a huge wall between them. The big challenge, I think, for the advisory community is getting all the other people with wealth to actually become philanthropists, because I think it's something like 5%, according to a recent report. It's very, very low for me, that is the big challenge. And I think advisors have a really key role to help guide their clients in whatever institution they work for, to make them feel comfortable to invest in, to become a philanthropist, to invest into giving, or invest in impact investing, to put their money into impact investing. And so for me, that's the big challenge, I think, rather than people who are existing philanthropists.
I'm going to reinforce that because our research clearly indicates that professional advisors are key to increasing philanthropy. And right now in the UK, the median gift for high net worth, ultra high net worth is £4,000, which reinforces your point about 5%. Claire.
Yes, so absolutely. I would just say one last call. You know, philanthropists are notoriously bad at reinventing the wheel. And I think that market-based philanthropy, i.e. identifying the gaps of where the money is most needed and the investment is most needed, is the best way to maximize your impact. So I would urge advisors to urge family offices and up-and-coming second-generation philanthropists to, before they put a penny into anything, look at where the gaps are. It's not just education and health that we need to invest in. And I think the SDGs are a very helpful tool, finding out where to best invest your capital and not reinvent the wheel. And finally, of course, a small plug for Cambridge University and for our centre. So we're newly formed, but we will be launching our own executive education program in Q1 2021, and we'll be addressing all of these issues.
That was not a paid political announcement. Tony.
Yes, so I want to play a bit enfant terrible and just say that I would like to have a world very soon where philanthropy is not that much needed, where there's less inequality, less of a need for philanthropy. And on that note, I'll also post here the link to a study that just came out of the Tax Justice Network, which says that $427 billion are lost every year to to tax evasion, and so the money is there. It's just not distributed in a very wise way, I would say.
Thank you for that. Darshita, you get the final word, and because I can do it, we're going to go over our 30 minutes, so go ahead.
Well, I'll just wind up by saying, given its SDGs, I call them the world's to-do list for the next 10 years. Let's get ticking.
Wow, excellent. Okay, thank you very much, all. That was really great. We will organize something in the new year that will go into this in way more depth. So thank you. Over to you, Sophia.
Yeah, thank you all for your time and insight. It's always great to have such different perspectives. So thanks for sharing and for your candor. And just to explain, Tony running off is because he had another meeting at past. So we will be back next week looking at the public's trust in philanthropy, which I think will be a really interesting discussion. So thank you all for joining us and wishing you a wonderful week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.